On a warm February morning, Clara felt ready to begin her new life. She had arranged the table with roses, polished silver, and folded napkins into crisp fans. To anyone watching, it looked like the perfect Valentine's Day dinner, a celebration of love. But Clara knew it was the stage for something else entirely. Her husband, David, believed he was the one holding the script. He had bragged to his best friend Mark that Clara would crumble when the divorce papers landed in her lap. "She'll cry, you'll see," he said over bottles of beer. "Women are predictable." Mark laughed and nodded, eager to win their cruel wager. What they didn't know was that Clara had overheard them 9 days earlier, her tray of drinks trembling as she froze outside the doorway. She had held her breath while David's smug voice cut the air like a knife. In that moment, something shifted inside her. She was no longer the timid wife they thought they controlled. She was preparing to end the game on her terms. Clara hadn't always been strong. There was a time when David's sarcasm felt like 1,000 small cuts she couldn't stop. At dinner parties, he would stroke her shoulder and joke, "You know I could leave you tomorrow, right?" Everyone laughed. She laughed too, pretending not to care. But inside, the words left bruises. Over the years, the laughter grew sharper. He mocked her red dress, whispered criticisms in her ear, and muttered "useless" whenever she forgot something small. He never raised his voice or his hand. David preferred cruelty quiet enough to deny later. Clara's best friend Miriam saw it clearly. "He doesn't have to shout to hurt you," Miriam warned one afternoon. "You're disappearing." Clara had defended him, whispering, "He's just sarcastic, he doesn't mean it." But she knew deep down she was shrinking. She stopped attending her book club. She answered her sister's calls less often. She lived orbiting David's moods, careful not to disturb his fragile pride. The change began the night of the Sunwave Holdings Gala. Clara stood in glittering light, a champagne flute in her hand, when David leaned close and muttered, "You're just like the rest, always wanting more, always clinging." Her face burned, but she stayed silent. Back home, she poured him another drink and suggested with a soft tone, "Maybe we should sign something since you always joke about leaving." David laughed, scrawled his name across a napkin and tossed it aside like it was nothing. He forgot by morning. Clara didn't. The very next day, she had it notarized and stored safely in a private email Miriam had set up for her. That was the first brick of the fortress she was quietly building. She didn't stop cooking his meals or wearing the clothes he liked. But in secret, she began writing everything down. She hid a plain spiral notebook under her mattress, recording every insult, every late night, every time he smelled of perfume and liquor. She wasn't plotting revenge yet, not exactly. But she was preparing. Clara became a mirror, reflecting back what David expected. When he boasted, she praised. When he insulted her in public, she smiled. He thought she was softening. In truth, she was sharpening. She stored receipts, scanned suspicious hotel bills, and logged every mysterious message that flashed across his phone. One text read, "Tonight, same place." She synced his data quietly, then returned to the kitchen and baked his favorite lasagna. He ate happily, never noticing the walls closing in. At a weekend barbecue, Mark whispered to David, "She'll fall apart if you leave her. Too dependent." Clara, arranging fruit on a platter nearby, heard every word. She placed strawberries in a perfect spiral, smiling faintly. When David wrapped an arm around her waist, she returned the gesture smoothly. "You look beautiful today," he said. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, her voice calm. That night, she added another note in her hidden calendar. Step by step, she was building her parachute. 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, Clara found the final proof. David had been drinking and fell asleep on the couch, his phone unlocked beside him. A message flashed on the screen. It was from M. It read, "She doesn't suspect a thing. I'll file on Valentine's Day. Want front row seats." Attached was a laughing emoji and a short video of a woman sobbing. Clara didn't blink. She screenshotted the conversation, saved it, and deleted the evidence from his phone. That night, she lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. Roses, candles, whispered laughter. He planned to make a show of her pain. Instead, she decided Valentine's Day would be the night she ended his game forever. She gathered documents, met Miriam in secret, and sealed airtight agreements David would never dream of contesting. "He gave you the knife, Clara," Miriam told her softly. "You're just deciding when to use it." Clara smiled faintly. She wasn't rushing. He was preparing. And when the day arrived, she would not break. She would win. The house became Clara's stage and she played her role flawlessly. She cooked David's favorite peppered rice, folded his shirts and kissed him goodbye at the door. He thought she was docile again, softened by years of living in his shadow. What he didn't notice were the small red dots Clara began drawing in her planner. To anyone else they looked like reminders for groceries or laundry. But to Clara they were markers. Records of every large cash withdrawal, every late-night return, every lie disguised as work. "You're quiet these days," David remarked one evening, his eyes narrowing. Clara smiled sweetly. "Just tired, love." He nodded, satisfied, never realizing that silence was the sharpest blade she held. At the New Year kickoff party for Sunwave Holdings, David told a circle of young employees, "My wife's main hobby is overspending." The group erupted in laughter. Clara excused herself politely, locking herself in the restroom. She stared at her reflection, her lips pressed thin. For a long moment she whispered to herself, "He thinks I'm breakable." Her hands trembled, but her eyes hardened. That night, when David stumbled to bed reeking of whiskey, Clara slipped into the study and scanned another receipt. This one for a hotel room dated exactly on Valentine's Day last year. He had claimed to be away for business. She saved it, filed it neatly and returned to bed. She curled beside him, calm and cold, while he snored without a clue. In the weeks that followed, Clara grew bolder. She began recording late-night calls, only the ones that mattered. David's low chuckle marks careless words, conversations no husband should ever have. Each file was labeled, dated, and hidden in Miriam's encrypted folder. When Miriam listened to a few, her voice broke through the speaker. "Clara, you have everything you need. This isn't just survival anymore. It's strategy." Clara smiled faintly. "Strategy is what keeps me breathing." David never suspected. To him she was the perfect wife, refilling his glass, laughing at his stale jokes, playing the part of someone too blind to see. In truth, she was watching him closely, step by step, like a hunter studying prey. By February, Clara had transformed the home into her battlefield. Every document was backed up. Every call logged. Every insult noted in her journal. She rehearsed her role carefully, practicing smiles in the mirror until they looked real. "Are you nervous about Valentine's dinner?" Aisha, David's sister, asked when she visited. Clara chuckled softly. "Oh, not at all. I've been planning something special." Aisha, unaware of the layers beneath her words, beamed. "You're such a good wife." Clara only smiled. Inside her mind was steel. She knew David would strike on Valentine's Day. What he didn't know was that she had already chosen that very night to end it all. The morning of Valentine's Day arrived bright and deceptively peaceful. Clara woke early, moving quietly through the house. She polished silverware until it gleamed, folded napkins into perfect fans, and placed a vase of lilies at the center of the table. Lilies David claimed made him sneeze. She chose them on purpose. The air smelled of roasted chicken and cinnamon, filling every corner with warmth. By late afternoon the guests began to arrive. David's parents, his sister Aisha with her husband and a few close friends including Mark. Clara greeted each one with a soft smile, her movements steady. Underneath her calm, her heartbeat pulsed with fierce control. Tonight she thought the game ends. David arrived dressed like the king of the evening. A navy suit hugged his shoulders, a red tie matching the roses on the table. He carved the chicken with exaggerated flair, boasting loudly, "Clara's lucky to have me, don't you think?" His friends chuckled, raising their glasses. Clara matched his grin, nodding politely as though every word he said was golden. "Of course, darling," she replied, pouring wine into his glass. The table buzzed with conversation, laughter circling like smoke. Yet Clara's smile never reached her eyes. Beneath the clinking cutlery and polite chatter, she was waiting for the moment when David would reveal his hand, and when she would show hers. Toward the end of the meal, Mark leaned close to David and whispered something that made them both smirk. Clara caught the exchange without needing to hear the words. She already knew what was coming. David tapped his glass with a butter knife, calling for attention. "Before dessert," he said with a grin, "I have a little gift for my lovely wife." Aisha clapped her hands, expecting a romantic gesture. Mark leaned back in his chair, lips curled in anticipation. David pulled a white envelope from his suit pocket, walked to Clara and placed it in front of her. "Happy Valentine's Day, darling." Clara opened the envelope slowly, her expression unreadable. Inside lay the petition for dissolution of marriage. Already signed, already filed. He had even highlighted sections, eager for her reaction. Around the table silence fell. David leaned forward, smug and triumphant. "Well?" he asked. Clara's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said softly. She reached for a pen, signed her name in a single elegant stroke and capped it. The room shifted uneasily, the guests glancing at one another. David blinked, caught off guard. "That's it," he stammered. "That's it," Clara replied calmly, slipping the papers back across the table. Then Clara reached beneath the table and pulled out a small gold box wrapped with a red ribbon. She set it in front of David. "Your real gift," she said evenly. The smug grin vanished from his face. He untied the ribbon, lifted the lid, and froze. Inside was the leather folder containing the document he had drunkenly signed months ago. The one Clara had quietly notarized, reinforced, and filed. His fingers trembled as he scanned the pages. His lips moved silently, his face draining of color. "What is this?" Mark muttered, leaning over. Clara's voice rang clear. "It's the agreement David signed voluntarily. And I filed it first. Legally binding, under my terms." The air in the dining room thickened. David's sister Aisha set her fork down, eyes wide. His father removed his glasses and polished them nervously. Mark's mouth hung open. But I filed first," David sputtered, voice rising in panic. Clara's smile never wavered. "Which makes this even stronger," she said calmly. "Every asset, every clause, you gave it to me." She reached into her clutch once more, pulling out a small white envelope. David opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a sonogram photo. Clara's voice was steady, her eyes unblinking. "I'm 8 weeks pregnant." The room went utterly still. For a fleeting moment, a smile flickered across David's face at the sight of the sonogram, but it vanished almost instantly. The reality settled on him. Custody, assets, and the iron weight of the binding agreement he had signed. His shoulders slumped, his confidence draining away. "You planned this," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. Clara met his eyes calmly. "No, David. I prepared." Around the table, guests shifted uneasily. His mother's pearls rattled faintly against her collarbone as she reached for her wine glass. His father focused on his napkin, folding it unnecessarily. Mark looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Clara remained perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the picture of control. David leaned back in his chair, running a shaky hand through his hair. He glanced around the table as if searching for support. But no one came to his defense. The laughter and bravado that had filled the room earlier had evaporated, leaving only the crackle of candle flames. "You thought I'd beg," Clara said softly, her voice even. "You thought I'd fall apart. You were half right until today." David opened his mouth, but his phone buzzed on the table. He unlocked it, his face paling as he read an email from Miriam's law firm. It confirmed the prenup's validity with stamped copies and metadata attached. His chest rose and fell faster, his breathing shallow. A second buzz followed, this time from his father's phone. He opened it quickly, then stiffened. Miriam had forwarded the same documents to him. The walls were closing in and David knew it. Clara turned to Aisha with a small, pleasant smile. "I could use something sweet now. Could you pass the dessert?" Aisha blinked, startled, then reached for the pie knife. "Which one?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. "Apple with whipped cream, please," Clara replied. She rose from her seat with quiet grace, fetched a clean plate from the buffet counter and returned to the table. David's eyes followed her every move as if hoping to understand a conversation that had left him far behind. Clara placed the pie gently in front of herself, lifted a fork and took a slow bite. She looked across the table at David, her gaze steady. "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow," she said simply. The words struck like a hammer. David stared at her, stunned into silence as if she had punched the air from his lungs. She didn't look at him again. She savored her dessert, unbothered, while the rest of the table sat in heavy stillness. Finally, David shoved his chair back, the screech of wood against tile echoing like thunder. "You think you've won," he spat. Clara didn't raise her eyes. "I know I have," she replied coolly. He stormed out, leaving the gold box and the sonogram on the table. The slam of the front door rattled the room. For a few seconds no one moved. Then Aisha exhaled sharply and muttered, "I never liked that tie anyway." A ripple of uneasy laughter swept through the table. Clara set her fork down, her movements calm and deliberate. Aisha reached under the table and squeezed her hand in quiet solidarity. Mark kept his eyes glued to the tablecloth, his smirk long gone. David's mother drank deeply from her wine glass, while his father polished his glasses for the third time, pretending not to see. Clara leaned back in her chair and exhaled, not in relief but in confirmation. The performance was over. She had reclaimed her stage. That night Aisha refused to leave. "You're not waking up alone tomorrow," she insisted, carrying her overnight bag into the guest room. Clara didn't argue. She curled onto her side, one hand resting on the small swell of her belly. Aisha reached across the darkened room, brushing Clara's hand lightly. A silent promise. For the first time in years, Clara drifted into sleep without bracing for the sound of slammed doors or an angry voice. When morning came, David was gone. No note. No apology. Just silence. Clara descended the stairs to find the coffee pot cold and his keys missing from the hook. She made herself breakfast slowly, relishing the calm. By 9 o'clock she had called a locksmith. "Emergency or standard change?" the man asked politely. "Standard," Clara replied, then paused. "But make it fast." He arrived that afternoon, a quiet man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions. Clara handed him David's old keys. "Make sure none of these work anymore," she said firmly. When he left, she stood in the foyer holding her single new key. For the first time in years, something in her home was entirely hers. That evening she moved into the master bedroom. The air still smelled faintly of David's expensive cologne. She threw open the windows, stripped the bed and lit sandalwood candles, ones he had always forbidden because they gave him headaches. Over the following days, small changes rippled through the house. Clara noticed David's unopened mail piling up with red stamps. Final notice. Past due. Immediate action required. She stacked them neatly on a side table near the door but didn't forward a single one. On the third day Miriam called, her voice practically bubbling. "You won't believe this. His lawyer phoned me this morning. He looked like he'd swallowed a lemon when he realized what you've been holding." Clara pulled her blanket tighter, sipping tea. "Is it official?" she asked. "Oh, it's official," Miriam replied with glee. "He's lost 70% of his assets overnight. And with a baby on the way." She let the pause linger. "Let's just say his checks will hurt to write." Clara smiled, not for the money but for the freedom. For the first time in years she could sit in her living room without feeling like she was trespassing in her own home. The fallout spread quickly. Some friends unfollowed her on social media. Others sent messages carefully worded. "I'm not taking sides, but..." A few were bolder. One woman she hadn't spoken to in years wrote, "I wish I had your strength." Days later, a bouquet of white lilies appeared on her doorstep with a note. About time. No name, but Clara recognized the handwriting. It was Clara, David's former assistant at Sunwave Holdings. The gesture made her laugh softly, not from joy, but from recognition that the truth had finally surfaced. David's reputation began to crumble. The man who once joked about training wives like interns, now walked through Sunwave Holdings with shoulders hunched, charm drained. His team noticed he left early, missed deadlines and avoided conversations. Even Mark grew quiet in meetings, his laughter reduced to a nervous twitch. Meanwhile, Clara's world was blooming. She bought lavender soap again, painted the nursery a soft sage green, and lit candles after dinner without worrying about complaints. She walked barefoot across the cool tile floors, humming softly to herself. One evening she caught herself laughing with Aisha in the kitchen. Laughter that bubbled freely, unrestrained, like a sound she hadn't heard since her early 20s. The first time Clara felt her baby kick, she was slicing mangoes for a fruit salad. The movement was so soft she thought she imagined it. Then it came again, stronger, a flutter like the brush of wings. She dropped the knife, both hands flying to her belly. A smile broke across her face. It wasn't just a kick. It was a message: you're not alone. That night she opened her leather-bound journal and wrote one deliberate sentence. "This child will never mistake fear for love." She underlined it twice, a promise carved into ink. In the quiet, she felt the strength of her choice pulse like a heartbeat. By her 6th month, Aisha had moved into the guest room full-time. She arrived with 2 suitcases, a basket of warm bread, and a grin. "I'm here to keep you company, and to make sure you don't eat biscuits for dinner every night." They fell into an easy rhythm. Aisha worked remotely from the dining table and filled the kitchen with laughter. Miriam visited often, dropping off baby supplies and gossip. She slipped sticky notes into baby name books. "Page 52, don't pick this one. I had a classmate with that name who stole my lunch for a year." The house, once suffocating, now thrummed with life. Slowly the nursery took shape. Clara painted the walls a cheerful yellow, refinished second-hand furniture from the local market, and assembled a rocking chair with Aisha. It took 3 hours before Aisha tossed the instructions aside. "This is my villain origin story," she declared. They laughed until tears rolled down their cheeks, the kind of laughter that stitches invisible wounds. One quiet Sunday, Clara pulled a dusty box from the hallway closet. She knew what it contained: wedding photos. She sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through images of smiles that had turned to weapons. She didn't cry. She didn't frown. Instead, she placed each photo in a separate envelope, sealed the box, and labeled it to release. That evening, Clara drove to a donation center and handed the box over without ceremony. On her way home, she stopped at a bookstore and bought a blank journal with thick ivory pages. On the first page she wrote, "Plans that are only mine." Each night afterward she wrote something new, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes a single word. It didn't matter how much. What mattered was that every word belonged to her. The journal became her quiet companion, a place where her future unfolded without interruption, without control, without David's shadow looming over her choices. By the time the next Valentine's Day arrived, the air in Clara's home was warm with cinnamon and fresh flowers instead of tension. The table was smaller, cozier. No grand centerpieces, no sharp jokes disguised as compliments. Aisha brought her toddler, who giggled every time a spoon clattered. Miriam arrived with her new partner, filling the room with more laughter. Clara sat at the head of the table, her baby girl in a white dress with yellow stars, babbling happily in a high chair. This time there was no performance, only the sound of real love echoing through the home. After dinner, Clara settled into the armchair by the window, her daughter asleep against her chest. The others drifted toward the kitchen for tea, leaving her in the soft glow of lamplight. She looked down at the baby's tiny face, the rise and fall of her breath, the small fingers curled tightly against her sweater. A year ago, Clara had sat at a table pretending to smile while her marriage collapsed in front of strangers. Tonight she was exactly where she wanted to be. She whispered into her daughter's ear, "He once said I'd be nothing without him. Turns out I'm everything without him." Outside, the February night stretched calm and deep. For the first time in years, Clara felt her life wasn't just safe, it was her own. Built from patience, courage, and a quiet kind of strength that didn't need applause. David's name still surfaced in whispers at the market. Some said he walked differently now, shoulders bent as if carrying invisible stones. Others remarked that his jokes no longer landed, his charm faded. Clara never joined in those conversations. He didn't need to. She understood that true victory wasn't in humiliating him further, but in no longer needing him, his approval, or even his downfall to define her peace. In the months that followed, Clara filled her days with simple joys. She started a small online store selling handmade home decor, woven baskets, scented candles, carved frames. Orders trickled in, and each package she mailed felt like a piece of her independence sent into the world. She took morning walks with Aisha, cooked new recipes Miriam shared, and read bedtime stories to her daughter even though she was too young to understand. Sometimes laughter spilled from her lips unexpectedly, richer and freer than it had ever been in her married years. The house became a place where visitors felt welcome, not weighed down. One afternoon, Clara saw David across the street. He was stepping out of a bank, phone pressed to his ear, his face drawn tight with irritation. He didn't notice her at first. Or maybe he did and simply didn't know what to say. Clara kept walking, her steps steady, her heart calm. That evening, Miriam sent her a screenshot of Sunwave Holdings' quarterly newsletter. David's name had been removed from the leadership page. Clara sent back only a thumbs-up emoji before making tea and watching the curtains sway gently in the breeze. It was no longer about revenge. Not really. It was about the stubborn joy of living without fear. Clara could cook without worrying if the smell of spices was too strong. She could leave dishes in the sink overnight without bracing for complaints. She could laugh with Aisha in the middle of the night without guilt. These small freedoms were worth more than any asset David had lost. The first time her daughter laughed out loud, Clara froze in wonder, then joined in, her own laughter tumbling out like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. As her daughter grew, Clara embraced her promise. She read stories every night even when the baby fell asleep halfway through. She painted the nursery ceiling with stars, whispering, "You'll always know the sky belongs to you." She filled her journal with dreams, some big, some small. A family trip to the coast. A new product line for her store. A vow to learn the piano. Each page marked a future not dictated by anyone else's power. Sometimes she reread the line she had written months earlier. "This child will never mistake fear for love." Each time it strengthened her resolve. On the anniversary of her freedom, Clara invited Aisha, Miriam, and a few close friends for dinner. The house was filled with laughter, the kind that rings without restraint. Her daughter toddled across the floor, chasing after Miriam's scarf. At one point Miriam raised her glass. "To Clara," she said, eyes shining. "For proving that preparation is power and that dignity can outlast cruelty." Everyone clinked glasses. Clara blushed but smiled. She didn't correct her friend. She only glanced at her daughter, who was giggling on the rug, and whispered silently to herself, "This is what victory looks like." When the guests left, Clara sat alone in her quiet home. The February air drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of fresh lilies. She lit a candle and watched the flame dance, a reminder of how far she had come. Her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about renewal. She understood now that love begins with oneself, and that when you know your worth, no one can use it against you. She looked around the room, filled with warmth and laughter still echoing in the walls, and smiled. "We're free," she whispered to her daughter asleep upstairs. And for the first time freedom felt like home. Moral lesson. True strength is not found in revenge but in preparation, self-worth, and quiet dignity. When you know your value, no betrayal can define your future. Because the sweetest justice is simply to live well. Thanks you for watching, and please remember to tell us where you are watching from today. Hit the like button, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more of this.